The morning fog hung low over the Norman countryside as a distant thunder of artillery rolled like an approaching storm. German forces believed this sector to be safe, a quiet stretch where steel and strategy ruled the day. A Panther tank, 45 tons of German engineering pride, rested confidently behind a hedgerow. Its armor gleamed faintly under the pale sky, thick steel plates designed to defy anything the Allies could throw at it. Nearby, a German general stood observing the front line, his binoculars scanning fields that looked deceptively calm. He had seen years of war and believed he understood its language better than most men alive. To him, this tank was invincible, a mechanical beast meant to dominate the battlefield. The crew inside the Panther felt the same confidence, hands steady on controls, engines humming with restrained power. The war had taught them that fear belonged to the weak, and steel belonged to the strong. In their minds, nothing short of a miracle could touch them here. But war has a way of rewriting rules without warning. Far beyond the horizon, unseen by German eyes, Allied guns slowly adjusted their aim. Naval artillery, massive guns mounted on distant warships, prepared to speak in the language of devastation. Each shell weighed more than a man, packed with explosive force designed to shatter concrete and steel alike. Coordinates were calculated with chilling precision. Wind speed was measured. Distance was confirmed. And then, the order was given. The shell left the barrel with a roar that split the air and bent physics itself. It traveled miles in seconds, invisible, unstoppable, inevitable. The Panther crew heard nothing at first. The general saw nothing unusual. Then the world exploded. The ground beneath the tank vanished in a violent eruption of fire, dirt, and shockwave. In a moment that defied logic, the 45-ton Panther tank lifted off the ground. Steel screamed as if alive. Earth was thrown skyward like water from a tidal wave. The tank was no longer a machine of war. It was airborne. The general froze, his mind struggling to process what his eyes were witnessing. A weapon built to crush enemies was being crushed by invisible power. Time slowed, stretching those 60 seconds into an eternity. The shockwave hit the general's chest, knocking the breath from his lungs. His binoculars slipped from his hands and fell into the mud. Soldiers around him dropped to the ground in pure instinct. The tank slammed back down with a sound that echoed across the countryside. Its turret twisted unnaturally. Tracks snapped like broken bones. The once proud Panther lay crippled, defeated without ever firing a shot. Smoke poured from shattered hatches. Inside, the crew struggled to understand what had just happened. There was no enemy in sight, no visible gun, no warning, only destruction. The general's training screamed for answers. He had faced tanks, planes, and infantry assaults. But this was something different. This was power beyond the battlefield. His mind raced through possibilities. Airstrike? Impossible. There were no planes. Sabotage? Unlikely. The explosion was too immense. Then realization struck like ice through his veins. Naval artillery. The sea itself had reached inland to kill his tank. The general glanced at his watch. Less than a minute had passed since the explosion. 60 seconds. That was all he had to decide whether this position was still defensible. Another shell could already be on its way. He imagined dozens more tanks meeting the same fate. Steel flying like toys. Men buried under their own confidence. For the first time in years, doubt crept into his thoughts. German engineering had met overwhelming force. This was not a battle of tactics anymore. This was annihilation from beyond sight. The battlefield that once felt secure now felt exposed. Every hedgerow looked like a grave waiting to be filled. The general swallowed hard, understanding the cruel truth. Armor meant nothing when the sky itself had become a weapon. Around him, soldiers whispered in fear, their belief shaken to its core. The myth of invincibility was gone. In its place stood a single question. How many more seconds until the next shell arrived? The general raised his hand, preparing to issue orders that could savia or doom his men. The war had changed in one violent moment, and the Panther's flight was only the beginning. Silence returned for a brief moment, but it was the kind of silence that warned of incoming death. Smoke drifted across the field, carrying the smell of burning oil and torn earth. The general forced himself to breathe as his ears rang from the blast. His instincts screamed that staying still meant dying. Around him, soldiers slowly rose from the ground, their faces pale and confused. They had trained for enemy tanks. They had trained for air raids. They had not trained for the sea attacking the land. The destroyed Panther lay ahead like a fallen giant, its broken form mocking every belief they held. The general knew the truth before anyone said it out loud. This was not an isolated shot. This was targeting. Far offshore, Allied observers were already adjusting coordinates. The first shell had not been a mistake, it had been a message. German radios crackled to life with frantic voices reporting massive explosions along the line. Another tank unit to the east had vanished in fire. A reinforced bunker had collapsed like paper. Each report tightened the knot in the general's chest. He realized the Allies had unlocked something terrifying. They did not need to see their enemy anymore. They only needed numbers, distance, time. The ground shook again, this time closer. A second shell struck the earth, sending a pillar of fire skyward. Men screamed as debris rained down like metal hail. The shockwave flattened trees and hurled bodies through the air. The general dropped to one knee, gripping the soil as if the earth itself might betray him. Every calculation he had trusted was now worthless. Armor thickness meant nothing. Camouflage meant nothing. Experience meant nothing. Only survival mattered now. He shouted orders, his voice nearly drowned by the thunder of distant guns. Tanks were ordered to move, not forward, but away. Drivers hesitated, torn between training and terror. Then another shell landed. A half-track flipped upside down, burning instantly. The hesitation vanished. Engines roared to life and panic. Steel columns that once advanced with discipline now scattered like startled animals. The battlefield transformed into chaos. Allied artillery walked across the landscape with methodical cruelty. Each impact erased another piece of German confidence. Trenches collapsed. Communication lines were severed. Maps became lies. The general ran, not from fear alone, but from responsibility. If he stayed, he would die with his men. If he moved, some might live. That was the only calculation left. He reached a command vehicle, breathless and shaking. Inside, officers argued over impossible solutions. Call in air support. Pull back entirely. Hold the line. None of it mattered. The sky was already lost. Another explosion interrupted the debate. Closer than before, the vehicle rocked violently, throwing men against its metal walls. Dust filled the cabin, turning daylight into darkness. The general understood then that this was not a battle to win. It was a storm to escape. Outside, soldiers abandoned positions they had sworn to defend, not because they were cowards, but because they were human. No man could stand against a weapon he could not see, hear, or fight back against. The earth itself had become hostile. Allied forces advanced cautiously, watching the destruction unfold. They did not rush. They did not need to. The guns would do the work. German units attempted counterattacks, but coordination was impossible. Orders arrived too late. Routes vanished under craters. Vehicles were swallowed whole by the landscape. The general stared at the map one last time. The lines he had drawn with confidence now meant nothing. The front was dissolving, not broken, erased. He issued the order no commander ever wants to give: withdraw, fall back immediately, save whoever you can. The words tasted like defeat, but defeat had already arrived with the first shell. As the retreat began, the general looked back toward the ruined field. He saw the Panther tank again, twisted and silent. Once, it had represented dominance. Now, it was a warning. German engineering had met Allied physics, and physics had won. Night began to fall, but the shelling did not stop. Flashes on the horizon lit the sky like artificial lightning. Each flash marked another piece of ground lost forever. The general felt older with every step backward, not from exhaustion, but from understanding. This war was no longer about courage or machines. It was about reach, and the Allies could reach anywhere. By dawn, the position was abandoned. Only craters and wreckage remained to mark where an army once stood. The general survived the night, but something inside him did not. The belief that war could still be controlled. The belief that power meant protection. As the guns finally fell silent, a terrible calm settled over the land. The battlefield had chosen its victor, and it had not been decided by tanks. It had been decided by invisible force and unstoppable momentum. The general knew the truth now. If the Allies could do this here, they could do it anywhere. The war had crossed a line from which there was no return, and somewhere far away, the sea waited, ready to strike again. Dawn arrived quietly, as if ashamed of what the night had witnessed. Mist settled into the craters, turning the battlefield into a graveyard of steel and mud. Burned-out vehicles stood frozen in place, their shadows stretching like ghosts across the ground. The general walked among the wreckage, his boots sinking into soil reshaped by explosions. Every step reminded him that this land would never be the same again. Soldiers searched for survivors in silence, speaking only when necessary. There were no cheers, no sense of victory or defeat, only exhaustion. The Panther tank lay where it had fallen, its armor torn and twisted beyond recognition. Once, it had symbolized German dominance. Now, it symbolized a lesson written in fire. The general stopped and stared at it for a long time. In his mind, the 60 seconds replayed again and again. The flash, the shockwave, the impossible moment when 45 tons of steel left the ground. That single instant had changed everything. He realized the battlefield no longer belonged to those who held the strongest armor. It belonged to those who controlled distance and precision. Reports arrived from other sectors, each confirming his fears. Naval artillery had shattered more defenses. Coastal positions had collapsed under relentless bombardment. German commanders everywhere were reaching the same conclusion. This was a new kind of war, a war where power came from beyond the horizon. The general returned to his command post, quieter than before. His orders were cautious now. Defensive lines were pulled farther back. Movement was limited to darkness. Confidence was replaced by calculation. Across the battlefield, Allied forces advanced steadily, step by step. They did not rush. They trusted their firepower. Every mile gain felt inevitable. The guns offshore continued their watch, silent but threatening. Their presence alone shaped decisions miles inland. Men fought differently now. They dug deeper. They spread out. They looked to the sky and the sea before they looked at each other. The myth of the unstoppable tank was dead. Not destroyed by another tank, not defeated by infantry, but humbled by force beyond sight. Historians would later write about this shift in quiet words. They would call it adaptation. They would call it strategy. But those who were there knew the truth. It was fear that taught the lesson first. The general wrote his report that evening, choosing his words carefully. He described the damage. He described the losses. What he could not fully describe was the feeling. The moment when certainty vanished. The moment when war revealed a deeper cruelty. Somewhere across the sea, Allied commanders reviewed the results. They saw numbers, coordinates, successful strikes. To them, it was confirmation that their doctrine worked. To the men on the ground, it was survival measured in seconds. Weeks later, the front had moved. New battles replaced old ones. But the memory of the Flying Panther never faded. It was retold in whispers, shared as a warning, proof that no machine was invincible. The general carried that memory with him until the end of the war. Every time he heard distant thunder, his body reacted before his mind. Every explosion echoed that first moment. The war eventually ended, as all wars do. Cities lay in ruins. Millions were gone. But the lesson remained. Technology does not make war safer. It only makes it larger, faster, more final. The 60 seconds that lifted a tank into the air also lifted war into a new era. An era where distance meant dominance, where visibility was optional, where survival depended on what you could not see. As the battlefield faded into history, the Panther rusted into silence. Grass grew around it. The earth slowly reclaimed the scars. But the sky and the sea remembered. They had proven that steel alone could not rule the battlefield anymore. And from that moment forward, every commander knew one truth: if the horizon could kill you, nowhere was truly safe.